What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building an awesome $800 gaming PC that you can actually buy right now. I'll be running you through all the parts and how you can pick them up in budget, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Assembling the system from start right through to finish, looking at some of the cables and wiring too, before booting it up and testing out the performance a little bit later on. We've got some really great hardware that makes this an awesome build for 1080p gaming. Before that though, a quick word from today's video sponsor. Corsair's M65 RGB Ultra Wireless builds upon the legendary M65 design with the latest Corsair Slipstream wireless tech and much more. With a 26,000 dpi Corsair Marksman sensor that can be adjusted in dpi steps as small as 1, this mouse means business. Adjustable weight allows you to find your perfect center of gravity, while Omron optical switches deliver hyper-fast and precise responses. Everything you love about the M65 in 2021, now wireless. Check it out at the links in the description below. Throughout this video, we'll be including screenshots from newegg.com of realistic pricing taken today, and while this will change, latest pricing and availability can be found at the description below. Enough of all that stuff though, let's actually kick things off by taking a look at the CPU cooler, the motherboard, and of course our processor, before diving into any of the other components today. Now for the CPU in this build, I've gone for the Intel Core i5-10400F. This is a great CPU choice because it's got good single and multi-threaded performance, great for newer games like Cyberpunk and older titles like Fortnite for example. It also performs really well without any need for overclocking, which saves us money on our motherboard choice and isn't picky about RAM speed either. Obviously it's not as powerful as the new Intel processors, but that doesn't matter. We don't need that extra bandwidth in this build. I'll be coupling it up with this GeekaByte B560M DS3H. Now this runs on the Intel B560 chipset, which is actually a really great choice for a build like this one. Not only does this motherboard have 4 included RAM DIMM slots, giving us dual channel memory performance and good options for upgrades and future proofing down the line, but you also get Gen 4 NVMe support and the socket for the 10th and 11th generation Intel processors. 12th gen chips do require a new socket, but most of them also require DDR5 memory, something which definitely isn't in the budget for an $800 system. Now to install the processor, you want to go ahead and find the little golden triangle. First it's in the corner just here, and we're going to match this up with the bottom left corner of the CPU socket. Pull out your retention arm, that will then release the cover nice and easily, and we can drop the processor, not literally, nice and gently into place. That's not the right way around. There we go. It is a wonder that I don't break more things here on the channel, isn't it really? And then we can fasten the CPU into place. While we're here, it also makes sense to install the RAM or the memory. This 3200 MHz kit of XPG D20 is a great budget RAM option, and according to Newegg, you can pick it up for around $55–60, at least at the time of filming the video, which makes a huge difference in giving us more money to spend later on the all-important GPU. To install the RAM, you want to go ahead and find the gold contact strip, locate the notch, and match it up with the notch on your RAM DIMM slot. We're going to use the grey DIMMs for this build, alternating DIMM slots. If you've got all 4 DIMMs though populated, of course use all 4 slots, and if you've just got the one, you want slot number 2. Not sure why you would go for 1 when you've got 4 DIMM slots, but each to their own. We're also going to go ahead and install the CPU cooler at this stage of the build. I've gone for the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition. Though if you wanted to save yourself a little bit of coin, the standard 212 Black Edition without the RGB is a bit cheaper. Personally though, I think this cooler is going to work amazingly well for this system and provide us with some really cool temperatures on the 10400F, preventing thermal throttling and doing so a lot more quietly than Intel's included stock cooler, which sounds like a rocket about to take off. Now for this build, you want to go ahead and take the cooler. You also need to go ahead and take the back plate. With the scaffolding side sort of facing towards the back of your motherboard, you want 4 silver posts through each corner. We're going to use these to actually fasten the CPU cooler into place. This is best demonstrated if I flip the motherboard over. Take a look at these 4 holes right here. These match up nice and easily to the back plate. Look at that, beautifully done. And then we can position the motherboard onto our motherboard box. You then want to go ahead and grab these. Now these are 4 female to female screws or spacers that come included with the 212 Black Edition. We're going to then screw these over the 4 silver posts that we literally just pop through the rear of the board. Installing a cooler does vary based on the CPU you've got and sometimes even the motherboard, so make sure to consult the CPU cooler manual as this does have an impact. For this build though, it's nice and easy. It's backplate, then it's female to female posts, and then it's the cooler itself. The cooler then, with the fan removed, at least for now, simply sits on top and screws into these posts. But wait, we do need to actually pop one thing on before we do that. Some thermal paste. It comes included with your cooler and creates a nice thermal bond between the CPU and the copper cooler plate as well. So make sure you go ahead and do that, and then you can tighten the CPU cooler down. Leave the fan off for now. We're going to add that in later once we've moved our motherboard assembly into the case. Speaking of which, this comes in from Techware, and it's one of their new Forge lineup of cases. I've looked at a few Techware chassis actually over the last year or so and been mightily impressed. It's a great budget option, coming in around the £40–45 mark here in the UK, $50 mark over in the US. It's got a really great feature set too, with RGB fans up front and this cool polygon mesh design that helps to ensure plenty of airflow. It kind of resembles to me a Cooler Master TD500 mesh, but smaller, which is not a bad thing because I love that case as well. This one also has a white motherboard tray, which is a cool little accent, and a 2.5-inch SSD sled at the rear, something we'll be using for our storage later. Before any of that though, we're going to go ahead and actually install the motherboard into the build. To do this, it is recommended that you lay the case down flat, as that will make sliding the motherboard in a lot easier. Before that though, we need to go ahead and grab this thing, the motherboard's rear I/O shield. This provides basically the link between the back of the chassis and of course the motherboard itself. It clips in just down here on the rear with this rectangular cutout. The circular audio port should be towards the bottom of the case and it clicks in nice and easily. On higher end motherboards, this will actually come pre-done, but for this system, we've got to go ahead and do it manually. Now, there's one more thing you do need to check though before installing the motherboard. To do this, lift it up and locate any of the holes through the board itself. You can see there's a number of different standoff holes, and these need to match up with the standoffs in the case. So for us, we've got 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 2 towards the bottom. Actually perfect for our motherboard config, so no changes needed here. We can go ahead, slide the motherboard in, lining up the ports through the rear I/O shield, and then of course our standoff holes should line up too. Then it's a simple case of fastening down each of the 8 standoffs. Hopefully you can get a nice view of that as well from our overhead camera angle. And once you've done that, you can pop your CPU cooler fan back on too, and the motherboard is done. We're now going to proceed by installing the SSD before moving on to the GPU and power supply. Now for this system, I opted to go for the Seagate Barracuda Q1, a drive you can find for about $55 in the 500 gig capacity, or closer to 100 for more like a terabyte. Now, if you wanted to spend a bit more money and get a bit more speed, a Gen 3 NVMe drive would be a good choice too. Just watch out, because some cheaper M.2 drives that aren't NVMe often aren't any quicker than the SATA alternative, so make sure you read reviews and check that you're buying a good drive. I've gone ahead and removed this plastic sled. This is what we'll be slotting the SSD into. And you can see here that the silver screw holes on the SSD will line up with the 4 holes on the bottom of the SSD tray. We can then take some really small screws. Now these screws come included with your case in an accessory bag and should allow us to secure the SSD in without any problems. Remember, of course, an SSD is solid state, so you've got no moving parts, you haven't got to worry about vibrations or anything like that. It's just a case of securing it down and screwing it back on. Once you've secured the SSD into the sled and then return the sled onto the case, you simply want to wire up a SATA data and SATA power cable. SATA power will have to wait though, as our power supply is not yet installed. Speaking of which, it's not going to be not installed for long because it's the next component on the list. It's Cooler Master's MWE500. Now this is an 80+ certified unit that is pretty budget, I'm not going to lie to you, but with nice black included cables and plenty of connections as well for any future GPU upgrade, it's going to work well. You're never going to be able to run a 3070 on a power supply like this, it wouldn't end very well, but I don't think that's anyone's intention with a system like this one. It's still going to provide plenty of room for any overclocking of your CPU, should that be something you want to do later down the line, or the addition of course of a slightly better GPU. We're going to go ahead and slide it into the bottom of the case like so, and then spinning the chassis round, you can see here that we're presented with 4 screw holes, 1 on each corner. We're going to use these to secure the unit into place before wiring up a motherboard power connector, that's the largest PSU cable, a CPU power connection, that's the smallest motherboard power cable, and a SATA power cable for the SSD, which we touched on just a second ago. Finally then, we're able to move on to the last component today, the GPU. Now the 1650 has basically become my favourite GPU of the year, and we've used it in so many videos. Not because we don't have access to other cards. We're very lucky and brands will lend us out GPUs if we need them, but because it's a great card that can be found at affordable prices. Now, to be clear, I'm not budgeting MSRP for the GPU. I'm looking at current pricing on eBay of completed listings in the region of $300. Now, some of you are going to be going, James, I do not want to spend $300 on a 1650, and I agree, it's a lot of money to spend on a 1650, but I think we have to think about the bigger picture. If you want to build a 1080p gaming PC for $800, something that was quite reasonable before all the shortages kicked off, then this is the pill you need to swallow. This card is never going to be available again for $120, $130. It is just not going to happen, and I'm really sorry that that's the case. Some people will also be saying, but James, isn't a console just better value in the current climate? In all honesty, probably yes, but console shortages have made those tricky to buy, and if you want the PC gaming experience, that's not something a console is going to provide. Either way though, this card's a great card for 1080p gaming, as we'll check out in the benchmarks very shortly. This Zotac design is nice, but in all honesty, any 1650 that's in stock and readily available to buy from a retailer is what you should probably go for. As far as the installation goes, we need to proceed by removing this screw at the rear on our PCIe lane cover. That just comes out nice and easily, and then will fall off. Before going ahead and sliding the GPU into this rear slot cover, line it up with the PCIe slot on the motherboard and push it in. Try to give you guys a bit of a different angle on that one actually as well, and then we can go ahead and secure the GPU down. This one doesn't require any additional power, although our power supply does have the clearance and the headroom to provide it, but it makes things that little bit easier for this system. And with that, the build itself is basically done, but don't go anywhere, because we'll be looking at performance in just a second after the legendary GeekaWhat montage, where we see how good this PC looks when it's all booted up, powered up, and ready to go. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Awesome stuff. Now we've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to see just how well it performs. On your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view of all of the different games we tested out, and we'll be diving title by title into more detail in a moment. As always, full unedited gaming benchmark runs can be found on our dedicated benchmarking YouTube channel, so make sure to get subscribed over there. Kicking things off by looking at COD Vanguard, we managed to achieve 67 frames per second on average at 1080p medium settings. Considering how budget-oriented this system is, I was very impressed with these results. The numbers look good and the game looked great. It's a similarly positive story in Forza Horizon 5, where 62 FPS on average in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode covered us off nicely. A brand new title and some great results here. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, we got 109 frames per second on average when tested at 1080p medium to low. Some of those settings tuned down, but still that full quality HD resolution. The game visually as well looked really good, especially considering we tuned some of the settings down. Showing the power of the 1650, definitely not a card to be underestimated. To wrap things up, we also tested out Fortnite, first at 1080p high and then competitive settings, so hold out for that one. At 1080p high, we got 64 frames per second on average, with strong 90 and 99th percentile results, giving us a consistent frame rate and visually the best experience, but tuning down to low delivered us even more FPS. Specifically, 134 frames per second on average. Wow. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to get subscribed so you don't miss any more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.